Hey, Kayla. Hey, Barry.
Morning. Looking kind of dark out there on the West Coast, at least at Kayla's house.
Okay, I got a dog still outside. I'll be right back, okay?
Bring the light inside too, the daylight.
No, you can see me now.
Yeah. Yeah, you're good now.
Never been good. I was talking about the light.
Okay, just give me one more minute. I'll have my matcha tea. Sam, am I a host?
Sam went outside to bring in the dogs, so.
Oh, okay.
Whoops. I'm sorry I didn't make one of you host, and there's probably people waiting. Hang on one second.
Oh, don't worry. I have to get my matcha tea. And my AirPod buds.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, Stacy.
Hello.
Hey, Colin.
Morning, if you can hear me.
We can.
Yes, we can hear you. So this is Kayla's weekend. And I did confirm with Kayla, she can fill the entire 2 hours. So I will be in a listen/participation mode.
Another minute or two. I have to get myself settled.
And advance apologies, the tail part of this, I'm actually going to be participating from the road. I'm off to a brunch with my daughter who just moved into her dorm 2 days ago.
Ah. You're on your own now.
No, I got 4 dogs.
Your
and 2
menagerie.
cats. Yes, my zoo.
But 4 dogs and 2
Oh.
cats, is it?
4 dogs and 2 cats.
And a gong.
And a what?
A gong.
Your gong. Your gong.
Oh, you do know this, huh? Yeah.
You
You
played it for
demoed
us.
once.
I met your friend Jack, Sam.
Ah, that was a
I
while ago.
finally-
That was a while ago.
That I met him
Yeah. Wasn't it?
a week or two, couple of weeks.
No, Jack was here like 2 years ago.
I didn't meet him through here. I met him on one of I met him on one of Jerry's calls.
Oh, right. Yeah, OGM. Okay, got it. Yeah.
So that was fun.
Yeah. Jack and I have known each other since about 2010 or 2008, something like that.
Yeah. He told me he spent a week at your place.
He's visited me twice.
Like someone else is going to visit you.
Yeah.
I'm just pulling up my slides from before. It's a good thing
Okay.
I've got 2 computers now. But before that, can you guys do a round of check-ins? Because I haven't talked to you guys in a long time, and I'd love to know what's going on with your life.
Sam's expression is priceless.
I'm busy making people co-hosts so that, when I have to depart, this thing
Yes, I will let people
still
in.
runs.
I'll take that job.
Okay. Well, like I said, on Thursday, my daughter moved in to her dorm, and that took a while. And now I got to clean where she used to be because I'm going to move upstairs into the main master bedroom suite because I'm right now in the downstairs. So a lot of logistics around the house. And mostly getting to know Tatami.
That's the new cat.
Yeah. Yeah. When he got here, he was 15.8 pounds. Now he's like 2 days ago, he was 16.4. So in about a month, he's gained about 0.6 pounds. But that's, the 0.2 pounds is the granularity of my scale.
I'm sorry, I have nothing to share. Kayla, I can share with you privately. Nothing I want for the public viewing. I really enjoyed this morning watching the birds, though. For some reason, I came on at the end of an Alfred Hitchcock run, so I saw the last scene in Psycho, which was really interesting. Like, I didn't realize Ted Baxter played the guard, not Ted Baxter, whatever. What was his name? The actor that played Ted Baxter?
Ted Knight.
Ted Knight.
Ted Knight.
He was actually the guard. And then in The Birds, I never realized Suzanne Plachette was the teacher. So that was kind of fun. And I didn't realize that the character that Tippi Hedren played was Melanie, which she later named her daughter Melanie Griffith. So that's my morning.
That's a good check-in.
The cinematography was really amazing to watch, though. I have to say that was really interesting to see how they did it back then.
So I'm going to go off camera so I can change. Okay.
Will we recognize you when you come back?
Well, depends on if you've recognized my pajamas before.
Will you remember the plane? Never mind.
I don't get it.
Just remember the plane that we talked about the other day. I'll talk to you about it later.
My memory must be going.
Yes, it's going. I can't believe you forgot that. All right, Barry, you're next. Check in.
Okay. You know, August and September are kind of strange months in terms of what's happening or not happening. And so people go off on vacation and then other things sort of come to the surface that you don't normally pay attention to. I thought that the last week or two, the top stories of the news were really weird, really bizarre, really intriguing, really mystifying. And they generated a lot of reader response that was literally all over the map. And what struck me was not so much the stories themselves, which were plenty bizarre and weird, but that the public that was attending these stories, it was amazing how they divided their empathy and their condemnation versus characters in these news stories. And so it was very subjective, in my opinion, that they decided who was the character that they wanted to have compassion and empathy for, and which is the one they wanted to condemn. And I thought this is really bizarre how cavalierly the general public forms their opinions about who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, who we're rooting for, and who we want to, throw the pitchforks at. And that really kind of struck me as very strange feature of modern American culture.
Was there a specific story? Because I've been staying away from the news.
I mean, I could tell you the three top stories last week.
Yeah, the titles.
So one of them was the disappearance of the 22-year-old fiance of this couple that was on a cross-country van trip. That's a very weird story, missing enormous amount of detail, and the public is just deciding, who's the good person, who's the bad person. Then there was this weird story of a lawyer in South Carolina from a very prominent legal family, and his wife and son had been murdered about a year ago. And then he dreamed up, he wanted to end his own life, it turned out. He'd been embezzling from his own law firm, and he decided he wanted to commit suicide so that his one remaining son could get the life insurance. And so he recruited a guy to try to shoot him in the head during a repair stop on the road, and the guy missed, only grazed him. And then finally he admitted that the whole thing was an insurance scam. That was a really bizarre story, and it has lots of twists and turns. And I think the third weird story was this Mark Milley one, where the head of the Pentagon Joint Chiefs of Staff was talking to his counterpart in China, saying, "Don't worry, we're not going to let Trump bomb you guys." And then the question is, who's the good guy and who's the bad guy in that one? So all of these is that the public is just, very subjective about who to have empathy for and who to condemn, with very little evidence.
Very little evidence.
Right. Just the
But we
headlines.
see that all the time. I mean, that's something
Yeah.
that I'm always speaking up about when it happens, even in our small groups, because
Exactly. And that's the whole point, is that it happens at the intimate level of our own lives, and all the way up to top stories in national, international news. We see the same phenomenon of choosing sides based on scant evidence, and then saying, the fourth one is what's happening today in Washington, where the rally to defend the January 6 people who invaded the Congress, and this is to support them. And it's like how are people deciding who's the good guys and who's the bad guys? And who deserves compassion and who deserves condemnation? It's really weird.
That's cool. Okay, Colin, you're up.
Yes, thank you, Kayla. Can you hear me? Yeah, square screen. Yeah, it's been an interesting few weeks. I think the highlight is still, and probably will from now on, be the grandson. There's nothing more beautiful than watching a human become. And so, yeah, there's a strong bond there. Been doing some talking about different spaces on a meta level. That's kind of like Stacy, lots of personal things going on, but I share that stuff more privately. So I respect that. But, you know, some things we can share, and within the group, about different spaces you can be in, and like Barry's saying, the bias that people have towards people in different spaces. And if you are in a popularity situation, then that matters, I guess. Like, if you're going to go to a restaurant, you're going to order some food you think you want to eat, that you feel that's popular to you. But when it comes to, you know, and maybe if you wanted to get scientific about it, you might say, well, is the food good for me? Right? So you might start to get into some critical thinking. So really, it's all about critical thinking, making better choices, if you can actually think critically. Or if you just want to be happy and don't care whether it's going to be, you know, go to a fast food restaurant once a month probably isn't that big of a deal. Going there every day for supper is probably a bad choice, and you probably have to check your critical thinking on that. So that same analogy used towards spaces. You find yourself in a different space. So this GCC space is interesting because, you know, Kayla's going to present today something that's going to be very interesting. And I suggested to Sam, it might be something about dance. And he says, no, I don't think it's going to be about dance. And I say, well, maybe Kayla could put a little bit of dance into anything. And, you know, she's definitely, you know, so I may have the topic wrong, but who knows what Kayla's going to present. She may have said clearly what she's going to present. I'm not exactly sure. But this space is accommodating to whatever she has to bring. And to me, that is what I mean by being secular. Nobody has the power over to suggest what we might be able to bring here. And it's cult proof because there is no power over. And so to me, that means it's a secular space where it's the ideas that we need to criticize, not the people, and not necessarily the popularity. So it's the ideas that I feel I'm here for. So if Kayla expresses some things that are, in line with what I want to do, that's fine. And if she expresses something that's completely, just new and I never thought of, that's fine as well. But to say we all got to do what Kayla's doing now is a problem. So there's the feeling of space and what we can do here and what biases are in this space. And then there is other spaces. So I've been exploring some other spaces, been doing some talking with Glenn, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. But today it's not about that. So that's my check-in, talking about different ways that different spaces hold opportunities for conversations or not, and whether there's critical thinking involved or not, whether you're just trying to do sense making with something that's already wrapped in 4 layers of bullshit. That's really hard to get down to get the layers of bullshit off that onion. So depending on who you're talking to, you may be in the wrong space. So that's space traveling is what I'm talking about. And the word of the month is still effort. It takes effort to do critical thinking. And that's kind of the thing. People just want a quick solution. I don't care. I got to do it. So anyway, Kayla, welcome. And let's talk about what you want to talk about today, not what I want to talk about. Thank you.
That's right. It's all about me today. Well, I'll just do a little bit of a check-in too. It's good to see everybody here. I've been really crazy swamped busy these past couple of weeks, but then again, when am I not? Thank you all for supporting me. I could have probably advertised this a little bit better and shown up these past couple of weeks to rally people, but I'm starting to just kind of say, screw it. Even with my own dance group, which I've started, I haven't advertised, it's all been word of mouth, and it's been nice to be able to talk to a small quorum of people and teach a small amount of people. because you can get into the details a lot faster with just those core and then grow. So this is a nice space for me to be able to present this. And I really don't know what to call this presentation, except that when I'd come back from Ohio in July, I was talking to Sam about some of the experiences that I had there presenting about the Polynesian culture. I was given a wide topic that took me an entire day to think of, what do I say to a bunch of people about the Hawaiian culture or the Tahitian culture or the Polynesian culture in particular, because there's just so much, you know, and nobody ever narrowed it down for me. They said, just say what you want to say. And so, of course, I wanted to give everybody a really good chunk of my time. And when I had gotten there to present, it was an interesting group of people. They were all older. They were all Caucasian. There was more women than there were men. But it was nice to see the two guys that were there. So there were two men that were there. And anyhow, being, you know, lived here in California for most of my life. And over here, there's a melting pot of cultures. So to be in a state where there is one culture over another was pretty interesting, and it was kind of nice, and it made me feel honored to be able to present to them something that they probably never heard of before. So we'll see what this presentation kind of comes along. But I've got my actual lecture here, and the first thing I started with was, can anyone tell me what the Polynesian Triangle is? I don't ask you guys that.
The Polynesian what? I missed that word.
The Polynesian Triangle. Do you know what that is?
Oh, you're talking about geography.
Yeah.
Well, it's South Pacific, right? So maybe Hawaii would be one corner.
Yep.
Tahiti, Bora Bora maybe would be another corner.
Uh-huh.
What would be the third one? I'm blanking on what would be the third corner of South Pacific. Is it one that was involved in the Second World War, maybe?
No, the Polynesian, it's a lot more simpler than that. Anybody want to guess the corners of the Polynesian Triangle? Anybody else? Barry had one of it.
Oh, just one.
Yeah, actually, which was much more advanced than what everybody else knew. Anybody else want to give it a shot? No? Okay. There's going to be a reason to my madness as we go along, but
Can you give us a
to
hint?
answer to answer the question of what is the Polynesian Triangle, to the east, it's easy to remember the Eastern Islands. You know, to the west, obviously California, it's easier for me to think of Hawaii in the west. So you're right with that. And the top of the triangle is New Zealand, Aotearoa. And after that is the middle of the triangle, you've got Samoa, Tahiti, Tonga, and a couple of little islands over there too. So that's the Polynesian Triangle. And nobody even knew what Polynesia was. The only thing they had heard of was Hawaii, and that's it. So they thought this presentation was just going to be about one island that they knew, which is Hawaii. And when I thought of that, it kind of blew my mind, and it made me reshuffle what I was going to present in my head. So that being said, I mean, that is one of the very foundations, of course, when you want to collaborate and talk to somebody. What do they know? What type of assumptions are we making before we educate someone? You know, to see exactly what the depth of their knowledge is. and that's really difficult, especially as adults, when you're trying to collaborate with different types of people who have different types of politics, who come from different types of backgrounds. I mean, even as a young woman, I didn't know what the electoral college was until I was in my later 20s. So, when you're talking to people about culture, it's a fear factor because, number one, I know from my own friends, when I laughed and I said, nobody even knew what the Polynesian Triangle was, they just kind of looked at me and their eyes got big, like, and I realized, oh shoot, you guys don't even know what it is, And then that made me think, wow, I'm projecting this fear. I'm projecting, this judgment onto these people who are my own friends, So that was the first thing I thought about when giving this presentation. And so I'm going to have a bunch of questions for you guys a little later, or as it comes along, as it pertains to culture and how we actually, think of it and think of people and our own culture. I know the United States, a lot of people don't think we even have kind of a culture, but we do, we really do. And it's kind of hard, of course, to see the elephant when you're up close to it. So, all right, so back to history. I'm gonna quote something from a park ranger from Yosemite who talks about history. History is active, it's dynamic, there's an energy to it, especially when you're telling a story that excites you and excites the audience. So we all know that Captain Cook was generally, or not, one of the few, or one of the first people to go into the Polynesian islands and explore there. He went there in 1769, specifically in Tahiti. And then he went there 3 more times before going to the island of Hawaii and getting killed there in 1776. It was the first written document of Tahiti. And he described them as a gentle, generous people with a propensity to steal. And he also found some contradictions, such as witnesses of murders by the Ariori, and I'll tell you about them a little later, and also found them to be incredibly naive. For instance, one of the things that they discovered was that they can trade nails for food and sex. So nails off of the ship for those items. But when I was looking through the old documents of Tahiti, I found some interesting things that Captain Cook had described. For instance, when you talk about the old world, it's kind of impermeable. You've got these hierarchies, whether they're the kings and you have the court, and then you have the common people, right? It's all pretty impermeable. They rely on, family to pass it on, even today, over in England. You've got, the royal family to pass it on. However, in Tahiti, they actually had a society that you could, join to be able to elevate yourself to a higher ranking. And those people were called the Ariori. So that and the Ariori were, they were actors, they were creatives, they were builders, they were everything that the common people were today. But they were a society that was, indoctrinated into this culture and elevated, and they had specific jobs. One of them in particular was they were the only people that, could go and, present comedy and make fun of the ari'i, make fun of the kings, without getting beheaded or murdered or anything like that. So it's kind of cool and interesting to know that, an ancient society had this hierarchy that can elevate from, you can be poor and be nothing, to have some measurable status. So my first question to you guys is, do you know of any culture in history that had a people that could elevate their status without being born into it? Hi, Joshua.
Well,
Native American? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Stacey. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, all through history, women could do it by marrying into it. I mean, it's the truth.
That's true. Anybody else?
I was going to nominate Native American culture. Not that I know much about it, but I don't think it was terribly hereditary as far as I can recall from learning about it.
Okay. Joshua, Sam, Colin, want to take a stab? It's kind of far and few between, isn't it? Especially when you look at history. And I think that's really important because it's very important today that people have opportunities to elevate their status. And they're doing it now in a way that's just so interesting. Right now there's a culture of, Instagrammers that have elevated and made a living for themselves by taking pictures of themselves. When I hear conversations within the GCC about like the smart people problem, I love it when I think Sam was the one who said, it's just like society has made it so easy for dumb people to, to survive in this world, whereas there are far and few between people who can actually use their brain and invent something and better society. We're caught in this culture, and it comes from this notion that I want to be just as important as my neighbor, and it's things that have very little depth. So rather than, I started to think about history, and rather than, we all know that a lot of history sucked. But which parts of the good history can we bring light to today and say, hey, if the Tahitians actually had a society to where you can be born into, where you don't have to be born into status and make something of yourself, or you don't have to marry status and make something to yourself. There's got to be a way to collaborate with others, so that it's not like, oh yeah, this is bad and that's bad and this is bad and that's bad. It's kind of like what Glenn said a couple of weeks ago. Why are we talking about things that are awful all the time? The world has got plenty of it. Why don't we dig a little bit and think about some of the things that are good about our culture, that are good about society, that makes it a little bit easier, and perhaps kind of shine light on that, even though they're far and few between.
I'll jump on that one.
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I am not a negative person. Now let's see all the people laugh at that statement. Because, and I saw a lady on the news recently. I wish I could remember her name, Fran something. And she was a commentator, wrote books, but she's kind of in the part where she's in the documentary phase of her life, and she says, people think I'm negative. She says, I don't think I'm negative. I think I'm realistic, she says. So I think there's a balance, and some of what I'm hoping to do with Glenn is going to bring that balance out, just like you're saying, because Glenn is all about the positive, right? And I'm all about, okay, well, let's make sure all the legs of the table are solid so you don't fall off that positive drunk table, right? Because it's almost like being drunk up there. It's like, you don't know what's holding you up there. You're just dreaming up there. So dreaming to a better world is a futurist type idea. And I think that's what cultures do. And that's why they have religion. They want to dream to a better world. But if they don't know how to take the current constraints and critical thinking, then it's just going to become like a wishful exercise, which is probably good to set a day a week aside for. And, you know, I'm very thankful that it is possible for ideas to advance. And that's with critical thinking. And I do believe we have to credit, I don't know which religion it was, but it was all from religion, I believe, the scientific method, right? And great art came from religion, although that might have been 2,000 years ago, or 50, cognitive revolution 70,000 years or so. So building up these stories of what's better for your culture. So it's all tribal. I've come to realize from reading Sapiens. So, you know, when you're making the decision of better, you're thinking about your tribe and your family and the people around you, your grandson, right? And everybody if you can. But there's just so many constraints, and the people who study the nuances and the constraints and analyze, it's a bitter service. I would not want to be someone to have to be on the protective services going through some of the photographs that people have to go through to sort out stuff. Like, yeah, we need a fun day, Kayla. There's definitely, we need a day to celebrate, but we also need to celebrate the negative so that it doesn't surprise us when we're not looking, you know, because that's the trick that they use. They do their left hand to make you happy, and then they slide the new law underneath with the right hand, right? What's that called? Shock and awe, Naomi Klein. Anyway, so that's the people who are trying to protect the things they love. Sometimes are very critical, right? They're playing defense. And I think offense happens when you have to act. So hopefully we can stay in some kind of a balance between offense and defense, yin yang. Sorry if I took too long, but I love the idea of bringing positivity into it to balance the negativity. Yes.
And go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think in 20th century American culture, and I guess in Europe too, is popular music. People come out of nowhere with their genres of popular music. You know, the Beatles came out of nowhere. You know, the American bands, pop singers, they're not hierarchy. They just come out of, you know, jazz. Look at all these, you know, all these genres, rap and jazz and rock and roll. That, you know, where did Elvis Presley come out of? I mean, he was just a kid in the South. So yeah, I think that's very non-hierarchical. It's real talent, certainly in music, maybe in art too, although I don't know as many examples in the world of art as I do in the world of music. Being non-hierarchical. Stacy put her hand up.
Yeah, I just want to be clear that to reach a certain level of popularity, no matter how talented you are, it does matter where you are hierarchically in terms of who your social circles are, because if you know the right people, you're going to get elevated more quickly.
Hmm.
You know, I mean, social media has leveled that out a little bit, but it's still there.
True.
Other than
True.
science, though, it's through popularity. Either it's from what
Right.
you can entertain, it's not from what you know or what your ideas are. And so there's two different frames, one where you separate the idea from the person, the message from the messenger, and the other one where it doesn't matter what he's saying, I just want the messenger, which is popularity, right?
You know, I learned a lot about the Talanoa conversation. And one thing that I loved about the Talanoa conversation is gaining from your own experience. And that's, I see a lot of people who are wonderful brain, very intelligent thinking, very forward thinking. They're putting out their feelers and their thoughts out there. But I also feel like we need to ground ourselves through our own experiences and grab from experiences too, to be able to push forward and relate to people. That's why I wanted to kind of do it this way. Talk about what I know and introduce ideas to, like Colin said, balance out kind of the way we think and reach people. So thank you. I'm sorry I deviated from everything. Okay, back to history. Let's see, what was I gonna say? Okay. Judgment of history. You know, so when you're talking about Tahitian dance in particular, it's very sensual. It really is. And the negative aspect of that was, you know, obvious to people who are more conservative, like, for instance, the missionaries who came there for their own agenda, you know, but it was also a shock factor towards the people like Captain Cook's crew. I'm not going to go into detail because it's really interesting. But a lot of people will speak negatively of that part of history. Now it's flipped. Like, oh, that's just a cultural thing. You know, I can't believe that they said that, blah, 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 and you know, Tahitians to this day, the ones who want to preserve the culture, will say that they made those, Captain Cook and his crew made those observations and judgments, and they were correct. There were a lot of indecent things going on, whether they were culture or not. And to actually read that part of history is a bit painful for me too, you know, as a dancer, as an expression of that. To see how they viewed this cultural act. It was within their right to say some of the things that they said, because there were certain things that were clearly indecent. And we have to acknowledge that, we really do. Another thing that was acknowledged when it came to the conversion of the Polynesian islands, and I know I'm saying things that might be triggering to people. You know, there's the preservation of culture, but there's also, you know, being straightforward and frank, and being realistic, like Colin said. So I'll just kind of dumb it down a little bit. Have you ever heard of Tapa Cloth?
Say it again.
A Tapa Cloth? I have. I'm gonna share my screen for a sec. Can I share my screen here? And I'll show you what it is, and I'll tell you exactly what it is. How do I do that? Oh,
The green one.
woohoo! Okay, desktop, yay! Share. Okay, look at all this crap that you guys can see on my, hi baby. Oh, this is why I put myself on mute, because this dog is crazy. Okay. So this is the Tapa Cloth. I have a ton of it in my garage. It looks like a dead body in my garage because it can probably fill my living room and my my garage. Excuse me, I'm just gonna open the door for the dog. Can someone help me and read this? You can read the first part.
Bark cloth, or tapa, is not a woven material, but made from bark that has been softened through a process of soaking and beating. The inner bark is taken from several types of trees or shrubs, often mulberry and fig, and designs are applied with paints and vegetable dyes of light brown, red, and black. Bark cloth is manufactured for everyday needs, such as room dividers, clothing, and floor mats, as well as ceremonial uses in weddings and funerals.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. So that was an all-day affair. That was how you show your wealth. When you go to ceremonies today, funerals, weddings, births, you have a ton of Tapa Cloth that you give, and that's, you show your wealth. Back in the day, the reason why only royalty was able to do these dances were because they were the only ones that had the Tapa Cloth. That's what they danced in. And it took all day to make that. There's even a portion of dance that's dedicated to, you know, kind of the making of the Tapa Cloth. It's the Pa'oahi now. And to break up the day, the women would stop and they would dance on this big Tapa Cloth, so that they don't have to, you know, just die of boredom, I'm guessing, or die of like a lot of work. So when the missionaries came, this was one of the few things that they liked about the missionaries, that made it kind of easy for them to be kind of wowed by the missionaries, is the introduction of clothes. Cotton made material like this for the women and men to not have to beat that Tapa Cloth to get the bark. They don't have to spend an all-day affair. Everyone can wear clothes like this. They were sold. So that is a part of history, again, that not too many people talk about, how easy it was for people to accept these new ideas, because it made it easier for their life. I mean, we like to think, oh, it was like, just they took everything away because they were all naked and blah, blah, blah. They weren't really naked. They just didn't want to wear all that crap, you know, to make it, if there was an easier way for people to do that. So kind of treading into interesting waters here, do any of you have examples of other cultures that made it easy, you know, even if it's today? And I'm sure we can draw a lot of examples today. Number one being technology, that make it easier for people to go, oh, okay, this is, you know, I'll get into this because it's easy for me. Anybody?
Labor-saving devices. They were really big in the 50s and 60s. You know, washing machines and dishwashers and any kind of labor-saving device was fabulous.
Stacy actually had a question. What is the value of showing one's wealth? You want to elaborate on that real quick?
No, I didn't necessarily mean for now, but I think that's a whole separate, different kind of conversation.
And that's a good question too, because what do you know, aside from monetary value, what are we measuring wealth as these days?
Well, that's why I say I didn't want to like divert the attention, but I think that's a really important question, you know. But anyway.
Please divert away. This is good. Anybody have anything they'd like to contribute? No? Okay. So I like to think about it like, if aliens came to this world with their superior technology and logic, you would start to question your own. You know, where as these missionaries and Captain Cup came with their big ships and their clothes and things to make it easier and all of these crazy inventions, I mean, it makes you think of your own logic. And it also is very easier for a person to sway their own mind, you know, to tell their own mind, well, maybe they're right. Maybe they're God. You know, maybe maybe their race, their culture, their ideas are far superior than mine. Because if they can weave these clothes very easily and not have to spend all day to do it, what can they show me? You know, and that's where I think people just get dazzled and, you know, very easily swayed. And it's a powerful thing to have. It really, you know, if you think of the simplicity of power, you know, if you can have a large group of people look at you in awe, you know, and want to be like you, and love something about you, but not see the rest of it, that you're a crappy person. Like Weinstein, for instance, he was a badass, whatever he was, producer, you know, look at what he did. And it was so easy for people to say, okay, well, maybe if I give him my sensuality or this, he'll make me into a movie star and I could be loved and adored and have all this wealth, all this money, you know? But you don't see Weinstein that he was a pervert and he was just absolutely a horrible human being. And that's just kind of what I think what everyone was talking about earlier is why do you question, like you said, Barry, like why are people so quick to judge? And this is the good and this is the bad. You know, how come, what's preventing people from kind of digging into it?
Effort, identity.
You know, the 20th century, and this was my century, the introduction of the information age. We had the telephone, we had the radio, we had the movies, including the talkies eventually. We had the phonograph record player, we had television, we had all these information technologies, and that wasn't labor saving. That was really entertainment and being able to communicate over great distances, either two-way or one-way communication. That really intrigued people. That was a huge culture shift, and that was received with open arms. People loved to go to the movies, and they loved to listen to stories told on the old-fashioned radios. They loved to be able to talk to their grandparents in another city, you know, every week. So that, you know, there was a huge culture change, and it was warmly welcomed. Stacy has her hand up.
Yeah, because the difference was, like, one of the positive things about that is when the radio show went on, everybody gathered together to listen. So it wasn't, you know, it was really interactive in that way with people that you knew on the ground, not with some strangers that you're really not that connected to.
Anybody else? I'm just going through this, the lecture that I had. There's a lot of stuff there. Okay, I think I'm done. All of this is more of, you know, history. And if you want to, hi Josh. And if you want to talk about, you know, the overthrowing of the king and queen, it was really easy for it, you know, at least in Tahiti, it was very easy for the people to overthrow the king, because he'd pissed off a lot of people. And then when the missionaries came, he aligned himself with the missionaries, and then ended up, you know, just using that type of power to, you know, overthrow his own people. And then after that, the missionaries had their own agenda, and there became all the war that everyone talks about. So anyways, through this presentation, I had really wanted to kind of introduce the ideas of what parts of history may, you know, what parts of history can we question and look at differently, you know, to where were talking about, you know, how easy it was for people to think a certain way and shift it. And also what parts that, you know, the foreign invaders brought that made it easy and shareable for their own community, if that makes any sense. So welcome, Josh. Did you have something to contribute?
I'm just racking my head going through history. Ever since you got on the call, okay, wait, which cultures did, okay. Yeah, thank you for a very interesting, like, it's more than colonialism, it's also, you know, when you started with Captain Cook, that's what got my brain racing about all these different islands and how many different cultures there are out there and so many different islands. So thank you for that. And I'm still racking my brain. I don't have anything. Thank you.
I kind of want to go back to Stacey's question. What is the value of showing one's wealth? Stacey, do you want to elaborate on that? Do you have some thoughts? Because I like that.
Yeah, I absolutely have some thoughts. Yeah, I mean, and this is what, you know, this is why I say we're responsible individually for what Barry brought in the beginning of the call, but in terms of why it's important to show your wealth, because as individuals, and I'm not saying everybody, and I'm saying a lot of us try not to do that. We recognize it in ourselves, but we move towards people with more status, whether we recognize it or not. And that's why, like, when we had that conversation about who would you allow to get your coffee? Do you remember that conversation? That's where it comes into play. If we turn a blind eye to somebody's bad behavior because they do something for us, so we know somebody who's really nasty and treats people horrible, but they always invite me to the best parties. And so we laugh at their jokes. That's on me. I'm allowing this system of popularity to become power. So I think that the reason people showed their wealth is to signal, treat me with respect. This is what I have. I deserve to be treated better. And I'm not saying that I agree with that, but I'm saying I do think that's the idea behind it. And contrary to that, I know somebody that never wanted their workers to see their wealth because they said, then they're going to want more from me, or then they're going to be jealous of me. So I think it's a valid point.
Yeah, to expand a little, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No.
I just wanted to say, to expand a little bit on Stacey's point, is that when you take a job, usually the work of the job is inherently not terribly pleasant. You'd rather not be doing it. So why do you do it? Because of compensation. Compensation could be just income, or it could be other elements of the workplace that make up for the bad parts of the workplace. And I think we make these trade-offs in terms of accepting the undesirable because it's compensated by something that is more desirable, but eventually that balance kind of wanes, especially when you now have enough compensation to live comfortably. Getting a raise is not as big a deal as it was when you were, could barely put food on the table. And so after a while, the downsides become the dominant element, and the compensation doesn't properly compensate anymore.
One thing I wanted to add to that too is the sense of obligation. I don't know, Joshua, you may have seen some of this, but the something of R. Kelly, surviving R. Kelly on Prime. And it was another one where R. Kelly, he is a very famous artist. If you don't know him, it was that song, I Believe I Can Fly, was one of his really nice hits. He actually had another song that everybody loved, but he was a known predator, child predator. He's very famous for also, like, one of the awful things he did was somebody leaked out him with child porn. It was awful. So when you're talking about work, I mean, big record labels had the obligation of, you know, a contract. His records sold, you know, so his wealth continued. There was just so many wrong things about that. Geez, I just forgot what I was thinking. It had something for what you said, but I'm sure I'll think about it.
About people being willing to look the other way when it's in their best interest.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. You know, and same with families. I mean, we're at a point too where, you know, I love my grandparents, but my grandmother in particular was not the nicest person in the world. You know, a lot of my family were toxic, and I had to physically remove myself from the obligatory family gatherings because I did not believe in surrounding myself with people who were toxic and others who would let it, you know, continue. So I mean, what do you do about that? Why is it that I'm crazy and like the rest of the family is not, because I choose not to be around these toxic people who are older than me, you know, and choose to perpetuate that and make my children go through, you know, hanging out with toxic people. And it doesn't matter if they're my family. You know, if anything, that is the reason. Like, hey, don't act that way. I can respect you, yeah, for sure. But I can't condone your behavior. Go ahead, Stacy.
Yeah, I also wanted to add that I forgot the exact percentage, but when it comes to people that are trafficked, the largest percentage, they're trafficked by family members. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, especially when you think about like why it's able to go on, you know, yeah.
It's become kind of a cliche to dread Thanksgiving, where you have to sit down at the same table with the relatives that you can't stand for a long evening meal, and it's sort of become sort of a negative instead of a positive to gather for Thanksgiving once a year.
So I just wanted to say that my presentation of culture actually took a lot shorter. So if anyone wants to bring anything else, you know, this is an open forum we could continue to talk about culture and wealth and things that kind of bubble up, or if somebody wants to bring a specific topic, go for it.
I just think that one of the real positives of multiculturalism is getting familiar with the cuisine of other cultures. We love to have cuisine from exotic cultures. And, you know, probably there are more restaurants in where I live in Greater Boston that have exotic cuisine from other cultures than sort of, you know, conventional American cuisine.
Yeah, I could jump in. The idea of the difference between, we're talking about culture today. So culture is, I think, more about a style of existence, I guess. Are
you still there, Colin? We lost your sound.
He's frozen.
Oh.
I like what you said, Barry.
I'm sorry, say that again.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Kayla.
No, mine was really silly. I was going to say, I like what you said about cuisine. Again, thinking about the Talanoa dialogue, what we usually do is we serve kava, and it's like a diuretic. Oh, he's back.
Yeah. Well, if you're in a town square and you meet up with somebody and you want to be popular and talk about music and cuisine and what can we do? We can go dancing, we could have so much fun. And they say, but yeah, we got to do a little bit of work too. And then you jump over to put the other hat on, say, yeah, what do we got to do, right? And then that starts a whole new conversation about what needs to be done. And then, you know, depending on the history of how things have been done already, like beating your clothes from bark or, you know, harvesting some other method of making clothes. And it just happens to be that maybe the problem is in the imbalance and the unfairness of taking advantage of people, right? Like if I come across somebody who's learning something new, like for example, my crayon maps, and they say, oh, we could use these to do this and we could use these to do that. And I'm saying, wait, slow down, slow down. They look pretty, but they get messy really quick and they're just meant to explore and sense make, you know, kind of what's happening in a way that we can remember when we come back to look at it again. If you really know what you want to do, you know, make an outline and, you know, write it up, make an infographic, whatever. But that newness that sucks in the people, they say, oh, look, I'm popular, I'm valuable, I'm going to take advantage of this. And they take advantage of the people. That's the non-cultural thing. That's the human thing that is interesting to me. Like what makes a person want to take advantage of another person? Is that innate? And then you get into philosophy, like, do we actually have free will, right? And then the conversation starts, and then they go to the, you know, where did the Big Bang come from? That's the next conversation after that. So if we stay at the, I think my phone is a dying, I'm not sure. Yeah, I got 5%. So I'll just stop there. But yeah, it's this scope of trying to figure out what is better, I think is the rub. And when everybody's being entertaining, everything goes, because you're in that non-sober state. I won't say drunk state, but you're in a non-sober state where you can play and dance and new ideas and what if. But then when you grab the hammer and you say, there's the nail, you know, it's like, okay, someone's going to hit that nail. No, don't hit that nail. We got to move this first. Oh, wait. There's, you know, there's like 50 things you got to do before you hit that nail. I remember trying to teach somebody to mow the lawn. That was a real process, you know, of knowing the scope of danger, and they just want to grab that lawnmower and start mowing, right? So anyway, yeah, that's, people take advantage of novelty, and I think that's a really a framework you have to watch out for. The novelty will get you, and also reading Sapiens, it's no wonder, because throughout all history, there's been caste systems. And at the time when the caste system has been, you know, slaves and noblemen, at the time when that's going on, apparently it's considered normal. So apparently there was a time in history, which I have a hard time to fathom, where one human could look at another human and say, yeah, your skin's a little different color, therefore you're not really completely human. I just, you know, I can't fathom what I would have to do to look at another human being and say, you're not human. But that's what they were doing. So we've come a long ways. And it does come down to education and critical thinking and being able to go across the entertainment line to the what are we going to do next line. And that's a really good balance to figure out. I think kindness is involved in that, but also urgency can be a problem. So this is an infinite conversation. I'll end there.
So this
Good,
goes to really what's at the heart of almost everything I say, and it touches on where Barry started, with people coming down with these harsh judgments without really knowing much. Because I truly and strongly believe that throughout history, the one thing that's remained the same was human nature and the way we behave. And I'm not saying it's nature, because I don't know if that's natural, but I'm saying that there's a tendency that we haven't learned to change, where we don't want to see our own shadow. Now, if I can't look at myself clearly and see the shadow and the light and be able to not judge it harshly, I can't do that for the next person. So if I can't say, yes, I did this, you know, this is something that's, the shadow part of me, and, I have it in check and I recognize it and I'm okay and I'm still lovable, then I can't do that with the next person. And what happens in the situations that Barry's talking about is somebody comes down really harshly and judges. If somebody else tries to say, well, wait a minute, maybe it was they get attacked. And I know that firsthand, because as I've said, I've gotten abused from groups on the left and groups on the right, mostly from groups on the left, because they saw me as one of their own, raising a question, looking at this, trying to bring up the shadow, because it's everywhere and it's part of it. And I think we have to, acknowledge it and accept it in order to be able to work with it, because there's always, until something reaches a certain level, it could be a very positive thing. That's when Colin was mentioning the idea of balance. It's when things get out of balance that we have an issue. So I don't want to go in too many different directions. I'll stop there.
Josh?
Yeah, I'm just diving deep into the cultural ideas in my mind. And the one thing that really made sense to me, like Colin brought up the book Sapiens, is that we're telling stories to each other to see which ones we agree on. So in a family situation, there's stories that the family tells each other, and this is how we act. We wear our clothes this way, we eat our food this way, we talk to our children this way, we talk to each other this way, and we all agree on that in a nuclear family. But then we go outside of the family and we see people doing other things, and then we have to make a decision. Do we impose the stories that we were taught onto the other people, or do we accept their story and bring that back to the nuclear family and tell them, you know what, you told me that I'm only supposed to eat with one hand, but I saw people eating with two hands, or I saw someone using a spoon, and I never, like, it's this little device that has a curve, and you have me eating with these little sticks, which is stupid because I can't get the food in the stick. And it's like all these different ways of, in other words, cultures are a lot about the stories we tell, and not the story that resonates, but the things that we don't do is what creates the culture of either the family or the society. So you can do a bunch of extra things that nobody ever seen anyone do, like eat with a spoon, but you don't eat with your hands, because then you're from India and that's just disgusting. And how could you just eat with your hands? And you wipe your butt with that hand. Why are you eating with that hand? That's disgusting. You can't. And then Indian people are like, no, we shake with this hand. We wipe our butt with this hand. It's like it's really just a matter of agreeing upon stories, and then that creates the culture. And if someone goes against the story, then they're against the culture. And that's, to me, what I think creates the culture is what we don't do, not what we can do, because sometimes things get added to the culture. And lately, I've just been on a kick of studying the Victorian age and how interesting things were back then. Like, women did not show their breasts for breastfeeding, but they were fine to have a wet nurse do it for them, because that's for the lower class people. They can show their breasts, that's fine, because no one cares about them. No one will ever marry them. They're disgusting. And those kind of weird cultural things persist from Victorian times in England all the way to America, to, we're not allowed to do certain things. So I would like to talk about the things that we're not allowed to do, and then ask the question, why are we not allowed to do those things? Like you brought up the wearing of clothes. It wasn't that you weren't allowed to wear clothes. It was just, what a waste of time to try to create all these clothes when there's other things to do, So that's just what I was thinking about. I'm complete. Thank you.
Oh, I really like that. Yesterday, my cousin was telling me, we were talking about my Uncle Bob, and I know some of you saw my post, but I was like, oh, there's pictures of your mom and your dad, roasting a pig in the backyard. We were laughing about it because the pig is on a stick, like the sticks through the pig's, it's a whole pig. It sticks through the pig's mouth, and then it's, back of the pig's butt. And we're in Camarillo. It's probably such an odd thing, right? So my cousin was like, my parents used to say, close all the windows when we eat. And I was laughing. I said, well, it's probably because it looks very barbaric from the outside. But then there was that question that you have, Joshua. Well, why? Why should we close the windows if that's the way we eat? And as a matter of fact, if you want to take it back to the actual culture of wiping your butt, Filipinos actually used, and I'm sure you know this, what's called a tabo. They actually use something to ladle and, you know, clean their butt with. It's water, you know, it's a bidet. It's an old school way of cleaning yourself, which is actually a lot more easier on your skin if you want to talk about that. But that's a good question to have. I mean, why are these, you know, judgments so harsh? I mean, what's the difference really? What's the harm in eating from your hands, other than you might get poisoned if you don't wash, you know, clean your hands well enough. And then that becomes an individual thing.
If I could play devil's advocate, in New York City, if you eat pizza with a fork, you get ostracized. So if you don't eat it with your hand, you're in trouble.
And fried chicken. Eat fried chicken with your hands. How else are you going to eat it?
Isn't there a state that has it on the book still, a law that you can't eat fried chicken with a fork? I mean, I only saw it on Facebook, so it may not be true, but I do remember looking it up, and it might have been South Carolina.
Do you know what the penalty was, Stacy, in that
I
anecdote?
think it turned out that it had been like a publicity stunt. I don't think it's ever been prosecuted, if I remember right. I'll look it up now, though.
It's funny when people look at you a certain way. Like I remember going into Asian households and just like, you know, stretching my legs out because I can't sit cross-legged the certain way that they're sitting at the time. I played a lot of basketball, so my legs were sore, so I was just stretching. And the look that I got from my friend, like, you just pointed your feet at my dad and he is upset right now. And I'm like, whoa, what did I do? And I remember feeling so embarrassed and just like grabbing my feet and hiding them. And like, you know, I didn't know about that cultural norm of the bottom of your feet pointing in a direction of a person. I had no idea about that. And I was embarrassed.
Yeah, that's Middle Eastern. You show the bottom of your foot to somebody, that's an insult in the Middle Eastern culture, at least some of the Middle Eastern cultures.
Yeah, I
Colin
think.
has his hand up. Sorry.
Go ahead, Colin.
No, you go ahead, Josh. I'll go after you.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think it'd be fun to go around the room and share the interesting nuances of all the cultures in the world. And I always, for me at least, I always cherry pick. So I take the ones that I personally like and adopt those, and that becomes my Joshua culture. And then people are like, what are you doing? Like, you're weird. You're eating lasagna with chopsticks? What are you doing? I don't know. I like chopsticks. So, but go ahead, Colin.
Sweet. Yeah. So, and some of the things that Glenn and I were talking about, I can share one of these balanced discussions. And basically it's trying to find an example of extreme difference without being controversial, right? So usually the examples I go to have the added weight of being controversial, and sort of it gets the idea gets marred in the identity. And as a side note, I said to Glenn, I don't have an identity. I probably have like, 72 identities, right? It's like, give me a context and let me, just like when you switch your talk, Kayla, when you read the audience and you knew that you were in a different frame than you thought you were in, you're going to reframe your talk. So that's identifying to me. And if you're stuck in a certain identity, you just got the same mantra and, you're in that dogma. So the example that I was talking with Glenn that is friendly is that what if, like Darren Brown, I was on the Darren Brown show and I got hypnotized and transported to Thailand, and I woke up and I was really hungry, but I was in the middle of the market, and all the food they have to offer, there was all of these insects on sticks. I remember seeing that, and like, would I be able to eat that? And like, how long would it be of me living there, going through the process and, you know, of grinding it up, putting it into my food, and then so on and so forth, until I say, yeah, give me 2 of those and 1 of those, you know, 2 crunchies and a juicy, right? I'm thinking of the show Lion King, where some like the crunchy ones, some like the juicy ones. But for me, the idea of eating that food is not a good feeling, that I have to eat that food. But I know for other people, it's a delicacy and they love it. So that is something where there's no science involved in that. They're right. If they like that food and it's good for them and it's healthy for them and they've eaten it for years and years and years, I'm not right, I'm not wrong, they're not right, they're not wrong. It's just, look at that huge difference in culture, and how long does it take for someone to adapt to saying, you know what, I feel like you do too. I think bugs are delicious. You know, that was a good one. I think that, now tell me if that's another controversial one, if I can clean that up somehow, but that's the juxtapose of the misalignment that people have to deal with and trying to think of what could be better. Like, I'm hungry, I want to eat something. Oh, eat this, right? So anyway.
Just fry it in butter with some garlic and salt.
You're my week 2 friend.
Remember the big crisis with the pandemic? We had a run on toilet paper in this country, big run on toilet paper in this country. Where did that come from?
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it really came from the 2 different mentalities. You know, there was a meme on Facebook, you know, there are some that know we're having a shortage of toilet paper, so they run and get as much as they can. Or there are some that know we're having a shortage of toilet paper, so they only take 1. So there'll be some left for other people. It's 2 different ways of thinking. And actually that reminded me of something else, because I had just seen an interview with Russell Brand and Candace Owens. And it became so clear to me. I found these results. Oh, sorry, Google decided to talk to me even when I didn't ask it to. That's scary. But both people really think that their way of thinking is what's best for the world. One of them comes from a very self-centered, what I would call selfish point of view, and the other one is a more altruistic point of view. But both people really do believe that their way of thinking will lead to the best outcome for everyone. You know, and that was like really striking to see that. Yeah.
I caught the first. Have they done a second part yet, Stacey, with Candace Owens and Russell Brand?
You know what? I only watched the free part because I don't subscribe. So I only got like the first 10 minutes.
Yeah, me too. I know. Curious to see where it ended up, because it was interesting to see the dichotomy.
Yeah.
It almost reminds me of the one in our circles with Nora Bateson and the levels of, what do they call it? She's debating the stage theory, I guess it is. And I don't know if that is
That's
a
really
meta level debate or an actual details debate, because, you know, sometimes you're so wrong, you're not even, you know, you're so wrong, you're not even wrong. And sometimes it's just details. So anyway, yeah. And I think Barry has another one with another system thinker that's going on. I don't want to open up a wound, but that sounds like something interesting to me too, because, you know, I know Barry puts a lot of thought into what he's thinking. So you know, and I think David Snowden's the other guy, and, you know, I think he's well respected too. So, you know, and Barry says, well, I know how to solve it. One of us has to die. It's like, you know, that's not the way science gets solved. Like, but it's interesting. Anyway, I'll be quiet.
Yeah, that was really about the propriety of banning as a solution to a dispute, is one person has to be kicked out of the culture, kicked out of the community to be banned, ostracized. That's a cultural problem that goes back 6,000 years, still isn't resolved.
Yeah. And I think there's been suggestions in this group of how to proceed to differentiate away from conflict or things that are unpopular. And I think that that's a good idea, but I think we're putting too much, trying to look for an easy solution where we really have to see why we got to do what we do and then do that. And then people can follow if they want to or not try to run away from people, but attract people to the positive thing, right? So what's the positive thing you can attract people into, as opposed to saying, well, we're here first, you got to get out, or we're going over there. Like, whatever. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
I have a question for Stacy. When you're watching the Russell Brand versus Candace Owens debate, whatever they've got, what questions would you have for them to make them kind of internally look at themselves and see why they, I mean, it could be obvious, but what would you ask them if you could?
I thought about that. So I wouldn't really have to ask Russell anything because I already feel like I connect with him. So I guess I would want to hear more about her childhood.
Who was the other person in that?
Candace Owens.
Candace
She's
Owens?
a conservative. Well, she's now, I believe the foundation she runs is trying to save school children from socialist thinking.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah. She's a Black woman, and that's important too, to the story.
Okay.
Oh, she loved President Trump too.
That's bizarre.
Yeah, you should hear some of her when the George Floyd thing happened. Oh yeah, she had some interesting things to say.
Well, that's this compassion versus condemnation divide. This is the polarizing divide that's so prominent in our modern culture, this enormous polarization.
But that polarization is usually protecting something. And that's why, in answer to Kayla's question, I would want to know more about some of her experiences growing up. And I would also say that I'm sure, like, I would approach it as if she has some reasonable points. And I can understand some of where I think she might be coming from. I disagree with her, but I don't nullify everything she thinks. And I think that's a problem we have in society. We nullify everything that the other side thinks instead of trying to find, I'll use this example because it's applies to now. People that have been vaccinated versus anti-vax people. I don't have the arguments anymore with people over whether they should be vaccinated or shouldn't, because I don't know everything. But the argument that I do make is, it's okay if you think the vaccine is not for you, that your immune system can handle it. But regardless, there is a population out there whose immune system can't handle it. So at the very least, wear a mask. So I make it more a conversation about masks. I allow them to have whatever, I can't change their opinions, and I don't know what I don't know. Just like, and that goes for everybody. But there's still no reason, regardless about how you feel about one thing, to not do the other. There has to, and to me, that's the compromise.
How many people here have had their tonsils out?
I'll say I was supposed to get I've been told many times to get my tonsils out, and my mother refused to do it because she didn't believe in that.
Yeah,
And
same thing here. My brother and I still have our tonsils. And the reason, as I understand it, is in the late 1940s, we had a cousin, a girl who I never met, who died on the operating table having her tonsils out. And so my brother and I still have our tonsils. one case that was in the, in the extended family. So, those are very powerful motivators, having
Absolutely.
one case. Josh has his hand up.
Well, I've just been thinking about healthcare a little too much lately, especially having a little daughter. But this might be controversial, but I was just trying to look at things objectively at the healthcare industry. And I remember a fact when Obamacare was very popular, they were saying that 1/6 of our economy is healthcare in some form or fashion. And then I started thinking, does the hospital have our best interests in mind to keep us healthy, or is it in their best interest to keep us just healthy enough to keep coming back? And that is, to me, the big debate about what the COVID or vaccines or anything is. Do they have our best interests at heart? And the question of that is the scary thing. When you go to a doctor, you want to believe that they're there to help you, not to just help you enough till you don't sue them. Just that kind of thinking in terms of anything is comes down to what I hear in a lot of conversations is we've lost our trust.
Yes, absolutely.
I think it's important to keep in mind, though, that just because the overall theme is to just keep us healthy enough to come back, that's not to say that the members that make up the organization feel that way, because that's what we do way too often. They worked for this place, they must be bad. And that's crazy. That's really crazy. Kayla?
Can I just say that there's just too many opportunities for communication too, which allows for a lot of miscommunication. I was showing my son last night one of the albums that my uncle had, and there was a picture of a woman, and in it he had put, her name. She was from Texas, and she was a TB victim. And I remember him telling a story. There's a picture of her lying in a bed outside, and that was pretty much on her deathbed. And so I started to think about TB. Now, I didn't look into it too much, but there's just and now we get TB shots, and we don't question that. There's just too much communication where it gets way too miscommunicated. And those questions, like you have, Joshua, arise. Do doctors have our best interest in mind? Does the healthcare industry have our best interest in mind? Because there's all these conspiracy theories, and everyone's opinions are just jam-packed into the web. I mean, what do we really believe? Whereas back then, when journalists were reporting, they were reporting, and not everybody had an opportunity to voice their own opinions. And there weren't as many doctors who may have been corrupt because there wasn't that industry of making money. So that was another thing that I just kind of wanted to share with you guys when I was looking at my own history.
I also keep thinking about our brains are wired for a certain way of living because it took millions of years to create the brain and the body. And the times that have shifted so fast in the last 400 years for the industrial age, et cetera, and so forth, is really screwing with our central nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system, and even tonsils. They're a detector for the food that's about to go in your body, so your body can detect it before it goes in. But then if they're taking that detector out, what is that doing? And that, as a metaphor for other parts of society, is what detectors are we taking out to know if we're going to survive and pass our genes on? Like even 100 years ago, most people were living to 40, if they were lucky, 50, they were really lucky. And, women that were just going through puberty, 12, 13 years old, were suitable wives for 30-year-old men. And that's a really difference. Now people are living past 70, 80 on average. And it's a change in your whole physiology. It's a change in everything. And we haven't caught up with the changes at being animals. We're human animals. We're still trying to grasp what's going on. Like, we don't have to scavenge for food. Like, wait, we can just go to a store and buy food. That's a real shift in the way your body's mechanisms were created in order to be able to survive. And with water too, we have lots of water available, and those shifts and changes physiologically are emotional and cultural, and it's hard, especially in other cultures where they actually don't have food. It's not the culture of America where you go into a supermarket and there's so much food and you can get cheap food. You know, you might not get the food that you want, but like, I noticed when I didn't have a lot of money and I was on a very tight budget, I could at least eat. I wasn't going to starve. I always knew I wouldn't starve, but I also knew that I, you know, might have to shift up my diet. Like, I started eating potatoes. That's basically what I did to like have filler, is I would put potatoes in every meal, and I knew that I would have enough starch and enough protein and be okay. But yeah, I wasn't eating filet mignon. So, but it's interesting how our bodies haven't caught up with the technologies that we have today of refrigeration. Like, that's the big one that changed everything. Now that we can keep the food cold and last longer. So I think we need to stop pretending that we're not in conflict and start looking at the actual conflicts not as a problem, but as a solution and an opportunity to solve. Go ahead, Stacy. I'm complete.
The challenge we face with that is that corporations control so much of the way we shift our attention. So like, when I don't know how much that's changed, but when I was in school, there was like one medical school that was teaching nutrition. Imagine one medical, I mean, I don't know how many teach nutrition now, but if nutrition were taught more, then maybe we'd be looking more at the food industry and what they're doing. But instead, we're not focused on the food industry. Hopefully we'll start to be, because with climate change, we're looking more at the soil and farming methods, and hopefully it'll all come together. But if we're so busy fighting, it distracts our attention.
What are we fighting over? Like, sometimes I ask that question, like, who are we fighting? Are we fighting ourselves, or are we fighting each other, or a combination of both?
I think we're fighting two truths that we don't recognize are meant to blend together.
You know, for quite a while in the 20th century, there were these books about culture shock and future shock, that with the multiculturalism, you were brought together in the large cities, the big metropolitan cities, with multiple cultures that were different from the small town you grew up in. And then, was it Alvin Toffler expanded that to future shock, that our technological culture was evolving so rapidly that people were having a hard time adapting to innovations in the culture. And I think that still is with us in terms of things like anxiety. Look at the prominence of people with anxiety issues, especially in the pandemic period, where we had, you know, a year and a half of lockdown, and then people returning to the workplace, but it's different. And they have to readapt and readjust, but it's not the same as it used to be. So you have all these anxiety and emotional issues because things are changing faster than you can adapt to them.
One of the things I brought up too a couple of weeks ago was, you know, how much positivity would it take to offset the negativity? I mean, people's minds are still wired in that, and that was created in our minds so that if something happened that was life-threatening, you'd always think about that negative issue, so that it wouldn't happen again, so you can survive. But now clearly we can survive, and people are still holding on to that negativity, you know, and it takes, what, 6 kind of like-minded positive incidents to overtake that negative reaction. So yeah, you're right, Joshua, about technology, and things are advancing far more than our physiology is advancing, that's for sure.
And our culture, right? It's I was just looking at this is something coming up on Monday, is the iPhone is going to change their operating system and put in all these new cultural sharing tools where you can listen to music together, you can watch movies together, you can do fitness together. But do we want to do that through a little screen in our pockets? I mean, Apple wants us to do that, but do we want to do that? Do we even want to watch a movie from another house with another person, or do we want to go to the movies together? And sometimes the technologies push us into these cultural norms. Like the difference between New York and Los Angeles is the amount of time you spend in a car together. That's a big part of our culture in the transportation and how we go somewhere with each other, walking versus driving. Go ahead, Stacy.
So I actually like that idea, watching things together, but not on a phone. I'd rather have it on my big TV where people can mill around the room. I actually think that's good. I've spoken to Barry many times. I'd like to see teaching occur more that way. So I think maybe they're onto something, but like everything else, it can be used in a way that doesn't work or that isn't positive.
Wow, got to jump in there. That's very interesting. So yes, this being able to share a video experience, or what I call vid crumbs, is what I'm working on. And I'm not surprised Apple did that. It's very, very smart. And I'd like to add retrospectives into that, which is the TikTok branch of that. And then, you know, if you make it so that it's got a repository behind it, then you can do it in a way that you can actually track the responses. Could be quite a nightmare if you don't have filters. Anyway, that's fascinating that they're going to be doing that, Josh, right on the operating system. And I guess I had a few other things to say about that, but I won't take any time. We're getting near the end. Although I will say in the appreciation thread of today, you know, I think it's wonderful that we can still be together without having full body suits on. You know, like in 50 years from now, the children that are just being born when they're my age, they might have to have more than masks to interact with society. We may become spacemen on Earth with spacesuits. I don't know which dystopian movie does that, but you know, if the atmosphere or whatever, apparently we're at the precipice of this global warming thing, and it's an exponential thing. And that's where people buying plastic might not understand what the ramifications are. We just cannot comprehend the scale of the damage that could be done. So, oh, nothing's changing today, but the exponential is the one iteration before it's completely done, it's half done. So it's half done, then it's gone. It's like, boom, it's over. So exponentials are not funny, and people cannot wrap their hands around those things, as well as wrapping their heads around long periods of time like evolution. So people who don't think scientifically, they're not going to be able to be reasoned with. They're going to have to be done through, I guess, what seems to be popularity, which is back to the Sapiens book. You know, what do people think is normal? What do people feel is right or ordained, I guess, is the thing. Yeah, so I'll leave it there. I did have one more thought, but maybe if we continue on, we can go there. Thank you. It had to do with the TVs versus cell phones. Anyway, continue. Thanks.
Yeah. In terms of the weather, I heard a story yesterday. You know, you have these violent storms, hurricanes and tornadoes and floods and whatnot. Turns out more people die from just ordinary heat waves. Far more people are dying just from plain old heat than from storms. Something like 10 times more people just die from, you know, heat exhaustion. And, you know, heat waves don't have names. Hurricanes have names. You know, big storms, they're big stories, but heat waves, you know, they're actually more dangerous than the big storms.
That's so Twilight Zone. Like, I remember
Right.
that episode.
Exactly.
Which episode was that, Stacy?
I think it's called Closer to the Sun or something like that.
Yeah, the Earth's orbit was shifting, and in the version that the audience saw, it was getting hotter, and the person was getting more and more delirious. But in reality, it was the other way around. The Earth was getting farther from the sun, it was getting colder, and so there was these two versions, and at the end there was a twist. It was actually a cold wave, not a heat wave.
Yeah, it turned out she was asleep, she was dreaming. So it was
Right.
the opposite.
Yeah, Twilight Zone's really good at giving context. Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say the one where the gold in the future is worthless.
Yes, yeah.
The best one that I just recently I was looking up was where there's two sides of the street and the aliens are playing with the lights, and each side of the street is blaming the other, and the other side of the street is doing something to cause the lights going out. And in the end, you see like these three aliens that had been manipulating the division between the two sides.
Yeah.
And that was something.
Yeah, that was the episode. It was called something on Maple Street.
Yes,
I can't
Yes.
remember the
something
enemy
like
that's
that.
arrived on Maple Street, but the enemy was the people themselves, not the aliens.
Exactly. But it was so appropriate for what
Yeah.
we're, living with now.
Everybody's blaming each other, and they had no idea the true underlying cause.
Yeah, I think a lot of my values and understanding came from the Twilight Zone, because I got obsessed with it as a kid, and I even bought the Twilight Zone companion, and then I would read back about the different ones, and the idea of trying to think outside of the normal storyline
Yeah.
of, oh, you have all this time in the world and your glass is broken. Oh,
Oh,
there's a
right.
monster here. Yeah, I thought it was a really good way to tell stories that were thought-provoking, so you would continue thinking.
Yeah,
And that's, I think now that you guys are saying that, I think that really shaped a lot of my thought process was the Twilight Zone.
yeah. The monsters have arrived on Maple Street, and we are the monsters.
Mhm.
The neighbors, they were the monsters.
No, this title is The Monsters Are on Maple Street.
Okay, there you go. And the twist, of course, was that there was these aliens that you didn't even know was the true cause. The root cause is often the last thing you figure out. The root cause.
Yeah. It reminds me of, they were talking about how they cleaned up the city of New York in the 90s, and they solved crime, and they did all this great stuff to make the crime go away in New York. And then someone did some research on Roe versus Wade, and there was a whole generation of people having kids because they didn't have the option to have an abortion. So they were raising kids they didn't want, which raises criminals. And then once Roe versus Wade came out, if you did the math, once a generation that was wanted came into being,
Right.
the crime went down. So it wasn't all the things they thought. And that's just one possible scenario out of many factors. But it is a big factor to be able to choose when you, as a woman, want to have a baby versus the law says you cannot. And that's a big fight right now in California. That's why Gavin Newsom was kept in office. He's not necessarily the guy that we want as the governor of our state, but the alternative is so awful. We were seeing that now in Texas. It's scary. It's like, not being able to choose the way you live. Or if you look at China, they had that one child policy, and now they don't have enough people to fill up their cities. So.
Yeah,
I'd like to turn back to Kayla. Well, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, very often the political solutions turn out to be ineffective at best and counterproductive at worst. That initially the political solution looks like a good idea, but in the fullness of time, it turns out to have been a terrible idea.
Yeah. And I just want to go back to what Joshua was saying about New York City, because what I see happen all too often is that we find one reason, and maybe it's accurate and maybe it's not, and we stop there. Oh, that's the reason. We don't go further to see all the other possible reasons. And maybe it's all of them, and maybe it's some of them, but we don't do that enough. And that's what's really frustrating for me.
Yeah, yeah,
Underlying reasons at that, not the surface ones, but you
right.
know, are these
exactly.
children actually wanted? That's a pretty deep question.
Right.
I
And
would
kids
find that
grow up
I would
knowing
hope that
they
humans
weren't
would.
wanted.
Yeah, I would
Barry?
hope that humans had an internal switch that wouldn't be a persistent problem. Like you wouldn't hate, like, you know, they're I would think that if I was given a child that was a burden, I would learn to love it.
Well,
That's what I would hope.
that wasn't actually the point I was saying. The point I was making is that the decrease in crime could have had to do with many different things, not just one. That's the point I was
Oh, yeah.
trying to make.
Yeah,
And then
more
Barry, you
deeper
said-
issues, many of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and Barry, you said something that I didn't hear, got cut
Yeah,
off.
it's that if you have a child who the parents didn't really want the child, but they're sort of saddled with the child and they're sort of doing the best they can, but not thrilled about it, the kid grows up knowing, figuring it out. Eventually the kid knows that they weren't a wanted child. They weren't cared for the way that, you know, they would have imagined would have been appropriate. And they turn up, they become punks, they become psychologically disordered. They have all kinds of adult issues, which may not come out until their 30s or 40s.
I was just going to add to that. I just watched, it's in its second season. It's called the Wu-Tang Saga. It's on Hulu. And it's the story of the group that created the music from the Wu-Tang. And there's a scene in the second season on the 4th episode where they're all looking at each other with problems. And they all say, we all here didn't have dads, so we don't know how to act. We're all men that were not raised by men.
Yeah.
And if we want to do something in this world and actually not get abused by the system, we have to become the men we've been waiting for. And I thought that was a powerful scene in the show.
Without role models, they didn't have role models.
Yep.
Except maybe television dads in the 1950s and 60s, they had these optimal family shows, you know, Father Knows Best and that kind of stuff. But those went out of style, I think, in the 70s. Then he started having the dysfunctional family sitcoms instead.
I'd also note, go ahead, Stacy.
This is the conversation that I'd really like to have with the right to life people, because I really feel that they don't move on to the conversation of, okay, well, where will we as a community pick up the slack? So they want to force people to have children, but they don't want to be part of helping to fill in the gaps of what those child's needs might be.
Well, I can get a little personal on this one because I know that I've mentioned to the group before, growing up for me, I know I didn't become this outrageous punk, but I did feel like I was a bit of an outcast because of not following what society was saying I should do, which was religion, right? That's where a lot of my religious resentment comes from, because a lot of that religion has got some pretty screwed up ideas about what's people should do, especially when it comes to sexuality and things like that. And, you know, religion changes its dogmas kicking and screaming. And if that was the backbone that we're telling these young Wu-Tangians what they should do to be better, it's, you know, that's part of the rebelling. It's like, you want me to do what and go where? It's like, can we please at least live in reality instead of this, you know, what do they call it? This perfect world that you have envisioned made of marble or whatever. So, you know, I think religion fails in that way. At the same time, I think people are truly compassionate.
I just want to mention that we're getting to the top of the hour, because I know I have to get off.
I just want to say thank you, Colin, for sharing that personal tidbit. I appreciate you sharing personal things about you and not talking from not the first person. So that was really nice.
Get worn down. I don't know.
This was a fabulous 2 hours, Kayla. I really appreciate your organizing and setting the
thanks.
theme for the conversation. It was a good conversation.
It's actually, you guys were like a huge part of that, because I wasn't really as organized as I looked. So thank you. I do like these questions though, and I do think they're really important, especially about culture, you know, when it comes to just perpetuating our own family. I think more people should have more direct but compassionate questions.
Yeah.
You know, coming from another personal standpoint of my grandmother was supposed to be executed because my religious family lineage came from Muslims. So yeah, that's part of my family history too, on my mother's side. But had she not had her grandmother, my great-great-grandmother, intervene and raise her with some type of compassion and belonging, she could have gone a really bad way. But my grandmother on my mom's side is a politician, the first politician on her island. So, you know, again, one of those wonderful conversations that you can get from in a time in history, you know, that even relates to today. That's not really a positive thing. Just, I don't know. I just think that we as people need to think differently. And like Colin said, bring the balance and ask questions, you know, and be the people that we want to be instead of wait for the people that
That's
wait for
Stacy's
somebody
thing.
to do it. So with that, I'm complete. Go ahead, Joshua.
Oh, I was just going to share an idea I had culturally is, well, I'll start off with the story my dad told me is that when Muhammad came up with the Muslim religion, or the people after Muhammad died were asking, you know, how often should we pray to Allah? Like that was the question, you know, how often do we think about Allah? And he said all the time, every day, all the time. Like, praise the glory to the creator that created you all the time. And they said, well, you know, we can't really do all the time. Like, how about, and they bargained from 25 times a day down to 5 times a day. And to this day now in the Muslim world, there's a call to prayer 5 times a day. But then it made me think about the cultural societies in America. How often do we, as a group of all of Americans, allow people to do whatever their meditation or prayer is or whatever? It's not a cultural thing where we say, hey, do you want to take a second before we have this business meeting and go pray to your God? And that's one thing I would like to see in our culture, at least acknowledge that there is higher forces or belief systems that other people have and let them tune into whatever that may be in their intuition before we just keep going on in society and bigger, better, more. I think that would be a definite shift and a cultural way to ask people, what do you believe in? You know, what is it that fulfills you emotionally, spiritually, and intuitively? And that could bring versus Kayla. So thanks. I appreciate that. I'm complete.
Anybody else want to check out? Stacey, you're mute.
I was just saying that Colin was trying to re-enter. I was letting him in.
I just want to sort of wrap it up by saying that in my 70 some odd years on the planet, learning to think logically was easy. Learning to have empathy and compassion is the challenge. They don't teach that in school. It's not part of the curriculum, and you have to kind of learn it through the experience of life. And I really think we need to bring better balance between logical, technical thinking and compassionate understanding of differences between people. I think this is a big challenge for the 21st century, is working out how to understand the role of things like emotions and in undisclosed life experiences that are behind people's upbringing, and develop some kind of compassionate insight to balance this emotion versus thinking aspects of being and becoming.
And I'll just add to that, that we've actually weeded that out. You know, growing up as a sensitive child, I was taught to hold the feelings in. And it was much worse for boys that were sensitive people. And even now, it's still, you know, in business, you don't want to show that side of you. So we have to accept and acknowledge that our culture has weeded that out. So as much as we say we want one thing, our actions and what we keep perpetrating is taking us in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
One more thing, I just want to point out, if people thought that Trump was vulnerable, they would have never voted for him. They voted for him because he created an image that he was all powerful and self-made and had the backing. And it was that strength that drew these people to want to back a winner, because, and that's whether people want to acknowledge it or not, there's a part of us that wants to be with the winners in whatever that is.
So Colin, I know you just came in again, but I think we're in our checkouts because it's 10 o'clock. Would you like to check out?
Five, I'm gonna guess he's having trouble because now, oh, there he is.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, I've said plenty. I was trying to go back to see if we could maybe wrap up and do a thing of, did Kayla achieve what she wanted to achieve, and did we, you know, I think we, you know, we hit on some cultural things, and it really resonated, and I think it not only focused the group, but it actually was a positive expansion. I think we could go back and take different threads off of this conversation, because it really reaches down underneath the biases of I know what's going on as into, you know, if you think about it culturally, we can't really take a whole lot for granted, and it redefines what the question better means. And I just want to say earlier, when you were giving, I think, me credit for wanting to ask questions, I think that's the Stacy thing. I'm just asking questions all the time, but I think Stacy's looking to build some kind of a platform out of the right questions to balance the conflict. I'm just there trying to make sure we don't miss the fact that there's a conflict and how we're going to write it down. And we can't play all the time. There's a naked boy.
Is that culturally appropriate for you to say that? No, just kidding.
Well, it's a good thing I've got my AirPods on. All
Hope you
right.
didn't hear
Well,
that.
no, yeah, it's great. No, it's normal. It's the norm.
I have to run.
Yes.
Seeing
Well,
everybody.
thank
Great
you,
job.
everybody.
Thank you,
Stacey.
Kayla.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kayla.
Bye.
Thank you, Sam, for allowing other people to culturally come on Saturday and host. So I think that's a nice culture. I like to share the moderation.
Yeah, let's keep
Excellent.
the conversation going.
See you guys all later.
Ciao, ciao.
Okay, I saved the chat. We're done. Thanks, Sam.